They tell us to celebrate and to be proud and to enjoy the moments. But what if the moment feels hollow, though? What if the people around us are cheering for something that we can barely feel? Not because we're ungrateful, but because no one actually knows what it took to get here. This is the quiet pain of reaching a milestone that no one really understands. It's when someone throws you a party and you smile, but all you can think about it though is how many nights you cried alone just to get to this point. It's when people say, "You did it," but you know how many parts of you had to bury along the way. It's when this applause feels loud and the loneliness feels even louder. See, there's a particular kind of grief that lives underneath our success. And it's not the grief of failure, it's the grief of feeling profoundly unseen in one's journey. When people celebrate what you've achieved, but not who you became. And when they praise the results, but don't even ask about the road to get there. Now, this happens more often than we care to admit, especially for those of us who've built a life around endurance and around sacrifice and around quiet, relentless work. And we became excellent at holding it all together, at showing up, at doing what had to be done. But by the time we cross the finish line, we've long forgotten how to be present in the celebration because we were never seen in the midst of our struggle. And so instead of joy, we feel flat and disconnected and sometimes even resentful. Why is this? It's because the celebration without context feels kind of fake. It's like someone congratulating you on climbing a mountain that they didn't even know existed. Sure, you appreciate the gesture, but you sure wish someone had been there at base camp or at 2 a.m. when you were just ready to give up, or when the weather turned and when you doubted if you were even on the right pathway, when it would have meant everything just to have someone ask, what was it like? But they weren't there. And now at the top, they cheer, and part of you just wants to scream, where were you when I needed you the most? See, this is not about blame, it's about honesty. See, we live in this culture where it celebrates the results, but it neglects the cost, the emotional cost, just to even get there. We tell people to push through and to rise above, and we rarely ask what was the cost in the process. We don't ask about the sleeplessness or the isolation or the grief behind the growth. And so when finally someone arrives at that moment that's worth honoring, they often feel like a stranger in their own life. See, here at Uber Bintegers, I talk a lot about integrity and intimacy. And I mean, this is just one of those places where both of these come into sharp focus. Because integrity means we don't just present our wins, we name the truth of how they were even born. And, and intimacy means we invite others to see us, not just when we're polished, but when we're also processing. Not just at the finish line, but also while we were still stumbling our way forward. But when no one has walked beside us, when no one knows the real weight of our steps, it can often feel challenging or impossible to celebrate authentically. And maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you've hit a milestone and had to smile through the party, all the while feeling this dull ache in your chest. Maybe someone told you that you should be proud, and you wanted to be, but all you could feel was empty, right? Maybe you've started hiding your wins because you're tired of explaining the invisible pain behind these wins. So if that's you, hear me out. You're not broken. You're not ungrateful. You're human. See, we can't feel joy in the moments where we feel emotionally erased. Because celebration without acknowledgement is not intimacy. That's performance. And we're not here to perform. We're here to feel. and to be known and to be witnessed in our becoming. And that's why this episode matters. Not because we want to tear down joy, but because we want to rebuild it from a foundation that's on truth. We want to make a space for the part of us that says, I'm proud of myself, but I wish someone knew what it took for me to actually get here. We want to make room for this celebration that also includes the sorrow and that includes the messiness and that honors the parts of our story that no one really was there to clap for. Because you deserve to be celebrated, not just for what you've done, but also for what you survived. And that's where we're going to begin this episode. See, there's something profoundly isolating about being praised for the destination when no one stayed really for the journey that you were on. And oftentimes, the people who most deserve to be celebrated are, are the ones who've carried the heaviest loads and wrestled with the deepest questions and persevered through years of uncertainty. These are the ones who also feel least seen when their moment of recognition finally arrives. And it's not bitterness, it's just the residue of being emotionally alone for so long. So let me name this clearly. Celebration without companionship often feels more like closure instead of joy. And for many of us, that closure is laced with grief. Because we didn't just want the applause, we wanted someone who knew, someone who could look at us and say, I saw the nights that you almost quit. I saw how you tried so hard and what it cost you to keep going. But oftentimes there's no one who can say that, right? Because we did do it alone. And when the people around us raise a glass and offer a well done, or even comment on how well-rounded we've become, it oftentimes lands strangely because they don't know the sacrifices behind the roundness. They don't know the years of not knowing and the tug of war between our purpose and the pressure points and the loneliness of choosing a pathway that no one else around understood. See, I've lived this path. I spent 16 years in my academic pursuit, 3 degrees later, and grad school, and relentless work schedule on top of it all. Not just one job, not even two, but even three jobs simultaneously, and all the while trying to keep up academically and financially and emotionally. I mean, I didn't have the typical university life. I wasn't club hopping or vacationing between semesters. I was grinding and trying to make meaning and trying to find my place in this world. And perhaps even more deeply, I was trying to figure out what my purpose in this world was that kept, when the world just kept telling me just to pick something, right? And settle in and perform. But I didn't want to settle. I wanted to feel something that was true. I wanted to find a life that wasn't just impressive on paper, but also honest in the soul. So I explored and I changed fields and I searched and I questioned. And all the while, others around me admired my endurance, but they didn't witness my inner wrestlings. Most didn't see the lonely nights and the fractured identity and the quiet desperation just to figure out who I was. They saw the diplomas, they saw the competence, they saw the drive, but they didn't see what it really cost me. And so when finally graduation came, that moment was supposed to feel triumphant, but it came with a complicated kind of quiet. See, there may have been a few congrats and a few you did it, maybe even some admiration for how well I turned out. But few, if any, really understood what they were congratulating. Few knew what it meant for me to walk across that stage. Few could have celebrated how I was becoming because they never saw the me that was unraveling in the process. And that's the truth for, I think, so many of us. Our greatest wins are shaped by this invisible labor. We suffer in silence, and we strive in silence, and we try to make meaning in silence. And when we finally merge with something that's worth celebrating, maybe a degree or a healed heart or a decision to finally leave a project that's completed, a body that's cared for well, I mean, the world claps, but it doesn't really see. And that dissonance, it's palpable because the celebration without understanding can feel so much like noise. And we want resonance, not just the recognition. We want someone to meet us in that moment and say, I know it wasn't easy, and I know you paid a price, and I honor all of that, not just the part that's easy to applaud. But here's where the power of integrity and intimacy comes back in. Because when no one knows your story, at least you do. And when no one else carries the full emotional weight of your journey, at least you're able to begin to do so. And that's not a consolation prize. That's a revolution right there. To live in such a way that you can tell your truth, not waiting for others to validate it, but you're actually able to honor it in full. And so you begin to celebrate yourself, not because others get it, but because you refuse to forget what it took you to get here. You remember the sacrifice. You remember the nuance. You allow both the joy and the sorrow to breathe together. Because that's what real celebration is. It's not just the confetti, it's also the quiet exhale that says, I made it. Even if no one else saw the mountain, I did. And I'm not going to shrink the story just to fit someone else's comfort. See, we don't need more shallow praise. We need deeper presence. We need to live in a world where celebration includes context, where we're not expected to pretend that our milestones were painless, where joy and grief can stand side by side, holding hands like old friends. Because that's what honesty looks like, right? And that's where real connection is born. There's this pain that builds when the outer world keeps saying, well done, and where your inner world is still trying to catch its breath. When we hit the milestones alone, and we often learn to mute that celebration, not because we're bitter, but because we know that no one is arriving with the full emotional vocabulary to meet us there. We learn to be careful about who we share the good news with, and we downplay things that we once dreamed of. We learn to expect shallow responses to these deep accomplishments on our part. So we self-protect and we minimize and say it wasn't a big deal. We shrug off the weight of our own survival, and we carry these sacred thresholds in silence because we know the kind of recognition that we crave is never coming. So we tell ourselves that maybe this is just how it is. Maybe growth is meant to be lonely, and maybe becoming always happens in this vacuum of sorts. But what if that's not true? What if we've simply never been given a language for honest celebration? Celebration that honors the depth of the becoming and not just the shine of the outcome. What if our society doesn't actually know how to celebrate in a way that includes grief and fatigue and uncertainty and cost? I mean, think about how often we turn milestones into masks. The birthday party that skips over the fact that you've barely made it through the year, or the promotion that hides the burnout that it took to actually get there, the wedding toast that skips past the years of loneliness before finding someone, the graduation that reduces 16 years of work and sacrifice and soul searching into just a piece of paper. We are trained to perform gratitude in public, even when what we actually feel is a tangle of things from pride to sorrow to loss and confusion and fatigue. And because we don't know how to name the fullness of that experience, we settle for surface level scripts. But here's what's true: celebration and grief are not opposites, they are actually siblings. We can feel joy and sorrow in the same breath. We can smile and still feel unseen. We can be proud of what we've done and still ache that no one has witnessed the weight of it. This is the kind of emotional integrity that we talk about here at Uber Bintegers. It's this willingness to stop performing the version of ourselves that is only allowed to be one thing. And having the courage to admit that sometimes happiness is not pure, that sometimes these milestones carry mourning, and that at other times the best way to honor a victory is to weep. Not because we're sad that we won, but because we know what was lost along the way. And the truth is, when no one knows our story, we have to learn how to be the keeper of our own sacred narratives. We have to start celebrating a little bit differently. Not louder per se, but deeper. We have to create these moments where we pause, not to flaunt our success, but to reflect on how we became in the process. I mean, we might light a candle, or we might journal a little bit. We might go for a walk and speak our story out loud to the trees. We might invite one trusted person to hear what the milestones actually meant to us. See, we do something to mark the moment, not because others have gathered, but because we've arrived. And even if no one else understands, at least we'll understand. This doesn't mean we want companionship. Of course we do. We crave companionship, but sometimes before the right people can come, we have to become the right kind of person who refuses to gloss over our own life and accomplishments. And we start this by seeing ourselves. We start by refusing to let our stories be edited into bullet points. We start by naming the work that no one saw, and the longing that no one really heard, and the tears that no one really comforted. And then we begin to ask for more. Not from a place of entitlement, but from this place of desire. We start looking for friendships and partners and communities where emotional honesty is welcome, where the question isn't, what did you do? But what did it take for you to get here? Where we're allowed to bring our full story to the table, not just the polished chapters that are ready for presentation because they're on performance. And that's when celebration begins to heal. Not because it erases the pain, but because it finally names your pain. Because it wraps the language around what was once unspeakable. Because it says, I see you. I see what it cost you. And I'm not just clapping for your outcome. I'm also holding space for your entire process of becoming. That, I think, is what we need more of. And that is what we can actually begin to offer to ourselves first, and then to each other as well. See, there's a quiet revolution that begins when we stop waiting to be seen and start living like our stories deserve to be witnessed, even if it's only by us. And so we stop handing our joy over for validation, and we stop shrinking our success to make it more palatable. We stop filtering our milestones through other people's expectations. And in this sacred shift, we start to rebuild something that we may have forgotten how to trust in the first place, and that is our own sense of worth. Not worth based on someone else's applause, or not worth based on who showed up for the celebration, but worth that's rooted in truth that says, I know what it took. I remember what it cost. I remember every step of the story, and I want to honor this now. Because even if no one else saw the late nights and the inner turmoil and the near breaking moments, we noticed, and that matters. So when we talk about intimacy here at Uber Bintegers, we define it like this: intimacy. But how can others see into us if we're not first seeing ourselves? See, intimacy begins with self-witnessing first. And integrity, that sacred alignment between our inside values and our external actions, it demands that we no longer pretend that our joy is simple when it isn't. That we no longer water down the complexity of our journey just because it makes others more comfortable. The truth is, most people will not understand what it took to become who you are. And that's not their fault. It's just the nature of invisible labor and of silent endurance and of inner becoming. But the people who can understand, they are out there, and they're looking for you as well. Because people who are tired of surface level celebration are looking for something deeper. People who want to know what it meant to not just finish the race, but what the process was. People who want to sit with you in your joy and your grief and not flinch at either of those. People who don't need you to perform happiness so that you have to stay close. See, that kind of connection is rare, but it's real. And we get closer to finding it every time that we choose to be honest about our experience, especially when the world wants us to smile and just move on. So here's what I want to offer you instead. Tell the whole story. Tell it slowly. Speak your pain and your pride in the same breath. Make space for both celebration and sorrow. Not because you're broken, but because you're human. And when confetti settles, when the room is quiet, and when the spotlight begins to fade, stay in that moment. Stay with yourself. Stay with this version of you who has fought for this moment. Stay with the memories and remember the efforts and the perseverance and the things that no one else was there to applaud. And then say to yourself, I see you. I'm proud of you. And I won't let this become just another hollow victory. Because we were never meant to perform our healing. We were never meant to reach a milestone just to prove that we were worthy. We were never meant to celebrate alone either. And while others may not always understand the journey that we were through, we do. And that knowing is sacred. So let that knowing be enough. Not to isolate you, but to anchor you. Let it be the ground from which your new connection grows. And let it be the reason that you begin celebrating differently. Because your story matters. Not just the ending, but all of it. And anyone who only wants the ending without holding the middle, they were never your people. So you don't need a crowd. You just need a mirror, a fire, a friend, a moment of truth. That's it. This is a celebration, the real celebration. Welcome to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Did this land for you? Let me know your anecdotes down in the comments below.